Welcome to the REACT Learning Series. My name is Vanessa Brewer. I am the Regional Interagency Council Program Administrator, and my co-host is Lee Taylor. Lee is the State Interagency Council Program Administrator, and we work at the Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental, and Intellectual Disabilities. We want to thank you for joining us today. Today's session title is Black Youth Suicide Prevention. It's presented by Mr. Beck Whipple. He's our Suicide Prevention Coordinator at the Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental, and Intellectual Disabilities. And before I turn it over to Beck for him to introduce himself, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. So if you haven't already, please mute your mics. If you have questions during the session, please feel free to raise your hand or put them in chat. We spoke with Beck before the presentation, and he is completely fine with answering questions during the session versus waiting until the end of the session. Also, just wanted to remind everybody that the workshop is being recorded, and it's going to be posted on the REACT's Resources and Trainings channel sometime later today. So we will put that link in the chat box for you to access at a later time. Also, we have a session evaluation link that will be posted in the chat towards the end of the session, so please take a moment to complete that. And as always, certificates of attendance are available by request. You can email me if you need one of those, and I'll put my email in the chat box as well. So I'm going to go ahead and quit screen sharing and turn it over to Beck.
Good morning, all. How are you? Get like a little head shake nod. Oh, Chris, this is like a group of friends here. So I'm very excited to come and have a conversation with you all today about Black youth suicide and Black youth suicide prevention effort across Kentucky. I would also really love to hear what you all are working on in this space. And so, yeah, just feel free. This is a conversation. And I know for some of you who maybe going to be watching this later, we're grateful for you watching and hope to have future conversations with you after you watch this. But my name is Beck Whipple. I am the State Suicide Prevention Coordinator, as Vanessa mentioned. I am also just kind of about me as I enter this space. I'm a white trans male from rural Midwest, so rural Kansas. And when I talk about rural, I'm talking about like rural, no stop signs, no McDonald's, like we don't even have a Dollar General. So that's like real rural. So those are the spaces in which I'm kind of coming into today. But also in the space of suicide is I'm someone with what we call lived experience of suicide. So it's a journey that I have walked and continue to journey with my relationship with suicide and suicidal thoughts and behaviors. So just kind of being clear and transparent today in how I'm showing up. And so we also want to talk about oopses and ouches and kind of recognize that as we're talking about any kind of underserved, marginalized, historically oppressed population, we want to make sure that we give space and grace, but also recognize intent doesn't undue harm. And so want to make sure that we're all kind of open and have the opportunity to say oopses and ouches, need to, if something doesn't land well or something's, said in a way that is, harmful. Hope to call me into that, and I'm open to that as well, and hope others can be as well. So anything that we need, we as a collective, anything we need before we start with the like formal presentation, anything we need to kind of be as comfortable as possible in this space. We can put in the chat, you can come off mute, whatever feels good to you. This is the hard part of facilitation. Oh, the quiet. It's good, but we have to, it's thank you all. So thanks, Kathy, for your comment in the chat. All right, well, we're going to get started on kind of what we are doing within the department, as well as a task force that we have implemented related to Black youth suicide prevention. And I also want to say Happy Black History Month. We are in February, so I always love learning and hearing the post and seeing the post of Black joy, Black innovation, Black, creation. So just really excited to see that. And I want to honor folks in this Black History Month. So thanks, Vanessa and Lee, for hosting this topic during this particular month. So, all right, here we go. I can run Zoom, I promise. Everyone see okay? Okay. So this is about our Black Youth Suicide Prevention Initiative. And I'll tell you a little bit about the initiative towards the end and some other resources and materials. But first, we got to lay the groundwork of why we are here and talking about Black youth suicide. So this is me. Yay. Funny picture about that story that I'll tell you. A funny story about that picture, but I'll tell you at the end. We are also going to be talking about suicide today. So as an overall topic experience, we want to make sure that doing suicide prevention and also learning about suicide prevention doesn't become a driver in someone's own, mental health distress or suicide. So you are grown, autonomous folks. So if at any point today you need to, turn me on mute, go get coffee, whatever it might be, please feel free to do so. There's also an incredible group of practitioners on here. So I'm sure that Vanessa, Lee, Christy, Dee Dee, if any of those folks, if you need to talk to someone or become distressed yourself or just need someone to vent to, I'm sure those folks would be more than happy to kind of go in a private chat if you need to or whatever that makes. So but yeah, please take care of yourself today as always, but especially as we learn about some of these risk factors for suicide. All right. We all kind of come to this space and with different identities, different experiences, different journeys. So just want to honor that some of us are here today to learn about folks that might be young folks that they might be working with in their workplace, young folks who might be share community with them. Some folks might be here kind of learning or with their own experiences related to families or even themselves or ourselves. So lots of different reasons to be here and to kind of be in this space. So we want to honor all of those. So when we talk about suicide prevention, we want to have the universal assumption that there are people in this shared space that have their own individual experiences, but also potentially have journeyed with others, and then also potentially have lost others to suicide. So as we're choosing our words, as we're choosing our kind of questions, thoughts, responses, let's maybe agree to understand that there are lots of universal experiences of suicide that are in this space. And that is also suicide prevention. So yeah, you're already doing it. All right. We at the department and encourage all other folks to do a comprehensive approach to addressing suicide, meaning we're not just focused on prevention, but we're focused on the entire, how do we intervene when someone's having thoughts or behaviors of suicide? So our intervention. We also want to make sure that we are supporting and caring for individuals, families, communities who have lost someone to suicide, which is what we call suicide postvention. Postvention is the planned intentional steps for supporting someone after a suicide. Many of you may have heard this. I know the folks that are in the department have heard me say this a lot of times, but suicide death is the no casserole death, meaning folks aren't coming with a plethora of casseroles and support. And in that isolation and in that indirect Words are hard. It's Friday, but we're gonna get there. We're gonna just keep rolling. Without those casseroles, without that explicit support, folks who have lost folks to suicide can feel like a burden or feel very isolated or alone. And those are also, in fact, become risk factors for their own suicide. And so we want to make sure that we are showing up with all of the figurative and literal casseroles if someone is to unfortunately lose a family or cared loved one to suicide. So that is what we talk about when we talk about postvention. Um, we do not want to put our head in the sand and just pretend it didn't happen. People want to talk about their loved ones. People want to share space, share memories. So we want to make sure that we're giving that opportunity. So this is our whole, full, comprehensive approach to addressing suicide that we hope that others can adopt as well, and kind of recognize also that you might have a space or a lane that you feel more comfortable in, and that's great because we need everyone to make up the freeway of suicide prevention in this comprehensive approach. Again, just kind of recognizing we're in this also in this social ecological model. So what I do to prevent kind of state suicide, I'm also doing interpersonally, intrapersonally. We also want to think about not only individuals, but how are institutions reducing suicide? How are workplaces, what are they doing to kind of create professional wellness and therefore reducing suicide? So we want to make sure we're thinking about this holistically in all of these different spheres. Just a 101 on suicide language use, because we know that language matters. Language conveys a message, whether intentional or unintentional. And so when we talk about suicide, we talk about suicide. It's an intentional cause, an intent to die. And we talk about suicide attempt as a non-fatal or self-directed, potentially injurious behavior. So something where someone did not die, but they have acted in a way that intentional way that they wanted to die, but they did not. And then when we talk about suicide ideation, we talk about thinking about, considering, or planning suicide. We'll also see some additional things. So when we think about language, again, we say died by suicide or died of suicide. You could even say killed themselves, but we don't say the C word because the C word is related to usually shame, stigma, things like, you commit sin, you commit crime, and we use it in that context. We are kind of lumping that into those kind of negative perceptions. So we say died by suicide. We also will just use plain language in suicide death or suicide attempt. If you have a successful suicide, it's a suicide. They died. We don't want to add kind of that qualitative value to it. And also, if they did not die, we don't want to use the word unsuccessful. It's just an attempt. And so you want to kind of think about that in the way, because again, if someone is trying to escape pain enough that their intent is to die, we don't want to use words like failed or unsuccessful. Like, they're like, man, I can't even kill myself, right? It's like it just compounds shame. So we say died by suicide, suicide attempt, or suicide death. And then you want to try to describe the behavior. This is really, really, really important, especially for youth. And not in the way that we talk specifically to youth, although I still hear people say, you're just attention seeking, you're so all these like kind of negative things. But really when we are sharing space with other adults and talking about a young person's behavior, we want to be real clear about the way we're talking about. And so, kind of thinking about that. So describing the behavior as in detail and kind of specifically as possible. And then we're also always working with someone who's having suicidal thoughts or behaviors. We're not dealing with that. Nobody likes to be dealt with. So again, all of these kind of things, if we're conscious about them, we'll send messages of, I am a safer person to talk with about suicide. And yeah, that will open up the doors for conversation, which is we know is a suicide prevention. Uh, so yeah, there's that. Any questions or thoughts or other things that language that I did not mention on here? Anybody heard anything else that they'd like to add? But why you try to make this a conversation? I'm just here on this Friday morning, just to get info.
I've seen the dealing with a few times, like in articles,
Mhm.
uh, you know, media things a few times, and it does always catch my attention. Like, wish they'd chosen different language.
Yeah, for sure. I learned this kind of pretty early on when I got into the field is if you can't substitute the word cancer for the way you're using suicide, you're probably using suicide in a biased way. So you don't commit cancer, you don't have successful or unsuccessful cancer. And so if you think about that, it's a way of, kind of a little litmus test of am I using this word in a way that again is showing bias in some way. And there are folks who have, again, lived experience and lost experience that will be more than happy to kind of give feedback on language. So if that's something you ever want, we'd be more than happy to do that or provide that resource for you. Thanks, Christy, for saying that. Any other folks want to mention anything around language? So as we drill, that was not a long enough time, but that's okay. We're going to just keep rolling. So I asked this the second time, so we're going to just keep rolling. So also as we thinking about Black youth suicide, what's language around race and culture that also signifies inclusion or exclusion? And so when we think about that as we go through, just paying attention to that intersection of race, culture, ethnicity, and also the language of suicide. So something to be aware of as we go through. All right. These couple slides are going to be kind of hard and heavy in the sense of they're talking about suicide death. Another thing I learned recently is I won't say suicide data because that indicates again that this person or that it's just a number, right? Data is just numbers. And so what we're about to look at is information about folks who have died by suicide. So data that or information that reflects the number of people who have died by suicide. And that is again feels a little bit different than this is a suicide data. So for suicide rates for Black youth, again, this is between 10 and this is national information about people who have died by suicide, Black youth. So between 2018 and 2022, there's been a 54% increase, fastest growing rate among any racial group. That's why we're here specifically talking about Black youth suicide. Also, the research is really interesting related to an impulse, like the time between a thought and the behavior. So what we're finding with Black youth, especially Black male youth, is that the window between I have a thought and a behavior is like so narrow. In the sense of a lot of, but again, Black male youth suicide aren't planned. And so many of you may be clinicians on here. And so you know the screeners are like, do you have a plan? Do you have a plan with intent? Do you have a plan with intent and access? So a specific risk factor for Black youth, especially Black male youth, is there might not be a wide window. There might not be as wide of window. And in fact, there is some research showing there is really no premeditation in some Black youth suicide. So kind of something to think about as we go through. And also there is a very strong link between experiences of discrimination and that suicidality. We're going to talk about, I think, did I put Joyner stuff in here? I did not. So Dr. Thomas Joyner talks about the interpersonal theory of suicide in the sense of when a person feels like a burden and when they feel like they're isolated or if they don't belong. Those are two main risk factors for increasing suicidality. So when you think about discrimination, those are very clear messages of you don't belong. And so that intersection again is something very important to think about. So I wish I had different news, but Kentucky is in line, unfortunately, with national trends related to our Black youth suicide numbers or deaths. And for Kentucky, this says 5 to 24, but just as a bit of information, the CDC in our youth in our Kentucky Violent Death Reporting, they don't classify youth of young people. Typically, do they not classify something as a suicide for those younger than 10 for data reporting? They will on the death certificate or something like that. But when you get into younger, between like 8 and below, there's a conversation about, does somebody know the finality of death? Does somebody know at 8 what that means? But that's not to say that young people as young as 8 do not know the word suicide and do not know what it means to their cognitive or developmental ability. So this is just to say, I know it feels awkward and uncomfortable to think about talking to an 8-year-old about suicide. And there are developmentally appropriate ways to do that. And I don't know, Lee or Vanessa, if you want to put this in the chat, but there's a great resource called, oh my gosh, it just left my brain. I'll come back to that. I'll come back to that. But there's a great resource that shows here are ways that you can talk with young people based upon their developmental stage. And that, again, is different than their chronological. So that was a great tangent. Thanks for going on that with me. But kind of back to the numbers. In Kentucky, are those Black youth who have died by suicide has doubled for those between the ages of 20 and 24 and tripled for those between the ages of 15 and 19. And there has been 150% increase in Black youth deaths from suicide between those 10 and 24-year-olds. This is, by a show of hands, how many folks were aware of that? And Didi, you don't count because you just saw this presentation on Wednesday. That we've seen this amount of increase. All right. See some head nods, some shakes. Okay. Yeah. So this is something that we are making sure that all folks know, is that, we are seeing this and it's troublesome, and it's a call to action on what we might need to be doing. So the way I'm going to look at this presentation is we're going to go kind of look at general youth, all youth, sorry, not general, all youth, right? So from all ethnicities, all races, all, kind of 10 to 24-year-olds. And so these are risk factors for all youth. We know ACEs, right, are a huge driver. Those that have 4 or more are 6 times more likely to die by suicide or have a suicide attempt. Lack of parental caregiver support, incarceration, community level risk, so exposure to violence, and our school environment. So are folks being bullied or victimized in some way, discriminated against in some way? So we get into next slide. Also, our social determinants of health. So risk factors include having a harder time accessing things like housing, financial resources, health, all of those. We think also about social media. There was, I need to kind of check to see if there still is. There was a whole federal commission on investigating the relationships between youth use of social media and suicide risk. So there's an entire federal kind of investigation or group think on the relationship. We saw a huge spike in suicides of our young people in 2014 in Kentucky. We're talking low, high teens, low 20s, to now we're up towards on average, 29 to 30 a year. And so that, and it could be, again, reporting, it could be a lot of different things. But I think too that we can't not look at social media expansion during that time. So, and that's not to say also that it's just youth social media usage. I think when we think about risk factors, we think about parental or caregiver use of social media. Are they on their phones, or are they attuned to their family in ways that show support and convey support? All right. So last two, substance use and lethal means, or access to lethal means. So these are all risk factors for all. So the next layer we're going to look at is, and I'm going to share the toolkit with you from SAMHSA. But the way that they've looked at it is they've taken a kind of a multi-leveled approach. So they look at risk factors, protective factors for all youth. Then they go into youth they identify as underserved. So underserved meaning that they are not using services or supports at the same rate as primarily white youth. So that's when we think about underserved. So for the context of this conversation, we're identifying underserved youth as those that belong to American Indian, Alaska Natives, LGBTQ plus youth, Latinx youth, Black youth, and I think there was one more. It's in my notes. Hold on. So those are the youth we're talking about that are in underserved. And so we're going to go now through the risk and protective factors for all of those group youth that kind of belong to those underserved, or marginalized, underrepresented groups. So, and then we'll go specifically into Black youth risk factors and protective factors and recommendations. So that's how we've kind of laid it out for today. So when we think about underserved youth, so those groups that I just mentioned are individuals that belong to those identities that I just mentioned. We have the highest suicide rates for those that are American Indian, Alaska Natives. And while we do have American Indian, Alaska Natives in Kentucky, youth in Kentucky, we don't have any formalized, recognized tribes, federal recognized tribes. Now, that's not to say we should ignore that, right? We should definitely look at why we have a lower population of American Indians in Kentucky. And so thinking about that. Also, those youth who have increased access to firearms, particularly firearms, those who are underrepresented or underserved, and also affected by the opioid crisis. Access, again, kind of access to education, housing, healthcare, and then on top of that, limited access to mental health resources, and particularly mental health resources that look or identify similar to the young people that are kind of identified here. So when we think about protective factors for this group, also very, very important. And that's that cultural connectedness, that intergenerational support, having that generational wisdom, having access to that generational wisdom, that cultural pride, that cultural joy, connectedness. And so that's a huge protective factor. Community-based programs kind of outside the realm of traditional mental health. So things more like talking circles, drum circles, some more somatic or art-driven, creative-driven practices. Also, strong relationships with trusted adults, school and peer support systems. So we know that for our LGBT plus youth, school systems that have a gay straight alliance or something similar, a formally recognized entity or peer group within their school, suicide risk and the effects of suicide affect that school a lot less. And then also ways to address historical trauma and providing accessible mental health care. And I even want to say support related to kind of with enduring or withstanding that historical trauma. And Dee Dee also, and those folks that are with the Kentucky Six can offer some really great resources for trainings with Dr. Nifley. So I'm sure you all have heard about those in the interim. And I don't want to say that like I don't want to be real clear when we talk about that is like that the experience of enduring or withstanding that historical trauma, that's not on the onus of the young people. That's an effect of a system that is negatively impacting that youth. So I just want to be kind of clear about that. So, but having access and means to address that is helpful. So recommendations, and in the toolkit that I'm going to provide Lee and Vanessa to share out with this, there are evidence-based programs, but more importantly, in this article, they mention culturally adapted evidence-based programs. And that's not just to say, well, I have a Black facilitator, so therefore it's adapted. No, these have been adapted by a community of folks and have shown evidence of that. And that adaptation has been also researched and so kind of thinking about that. So implement some of those interventions, increase access to mental health care, encourage school and community engagement, address those gaps in services, and then what are ways to promote safe storage? So if, again, Vanessa, remind me to come back to that thought. It's a good thought, but I need to come back to it or I'll be here for a while. All right, so kind of getting into key risk factors now, kind of again going to the more specific of that Black youth risk factors. Interpersonal conflicts, school-related issues are a large one that was identified. Mental health disorders, substance use, increased firearm-related suicides. So for again, this is kind of a disproportionate rate of death by suicide. For Black men or for white men, it's about 70, 75. So still high, but not to the level that you see here on the screen. And for Black women, this is really disproportionately high. I think white women, it's not even 50% die by firearm. So kind of thinking about that and being curious as to why that could be a potential increased risk factor. And then, as I mentioned too, lack of access to adapted or access or culturally, what's the word? Humble mental health care tailored specifically to the community needs. So protective factors, and this has been, there's a CAMS webinar. CAMS stands for Collaborative Assessment and Management of Suicide. CAMS Cares organization, but they did a phenomenal webinar and hosted on Black youth suicide and prevention. And one of the biggest takeaways for me was the need for a strong racial and ethnic identity, having pride, having joy, having, seeing pride, seeing joy, seeing all of the positive showcase versus kind of just hearing only about the negatives and only focusing on those disproportionate stats. Like how can we help folks build that strong racial and ethnic identity? Positive parenting, family relationships, community socialization and support, and then religiosity. And I put a little asterisk by this one. So religiosity as a source of resilience. And I think that this also, we have to be kind of, we have to help ensure that kind of positive religiosity in the sense of, are those spiritual leaders, are they also able to refer to mental health care? And, making sure that there isn't a discouraging messages related to mental health care, more formal mental health care. And also thinking about, what is the over inclusion of our queer Black youth in religious spaces. So we want to make sure both of those are kind of identified within that religiosity space. So I want to pause here and just see if folks have reactions, responses, questions, things that they would like to add to the conversation from your own experiences. So yeah, I want to pause here for just a second and kind of just check in with folks.
Yeah, I wanted to say, Beck, first of all, I wanted to thank you for how you opened the workshop by your disclaimer, because I think a lot of times when a non-Black person is presenting on an issue about Black um, topics in the community, already disregard and don't take you as credible. So I really appreciate that, and I've been writing a bunch of notes. I am a fact finder. I do research this in my own time. So you mentioned about systemic racism, which I love that you mentioned that, because some of the things that we talk about, and it's a shame we have to have a whole actual training conversation about this as an incentive to suicide, because suicide doesn't care about what color you are, what race you belong to, how much money you make, what community, what God or not God you serve, not serve, who you marry, not marry, what if you have a dog or a cat. So it's unfortunate that we have to have a whole incentive about this, but I'm glad that you brought it up. I am from Alaska, so when you talked about Alaska Natives and that community and people going to have resources, you have to also remember the cultural component of that. So, you have to go through your community leaders. And a lot of times, especially in Alaska, they don't trust white providers because they take their children and then want to put them into Indian reserves and all these different schools. So, and a lot, same thing you just mentioned about the Black church or a church. So a lot of times people don't want to outside of their church family, because that has been a source of strength and security and protection. When we couldn't go to any other place for resources, the church was our aid. So sometimes old-fashioned people say, hey, be careful about what you're telling the government. So I really appreciate so far how this training is going back, and you're doing a really outstanding job, and I'm so excited to hear more.
Thank you. Thank you that so much. Appreciate your feedback.
Hey, Beck,
agree.
I don't, oh, I'm
Sorry.
sorry. Go ahead, Kathy.
I agree with that 100%. And I appreciate you talking about the appropriate language too, not only within the church or whoever is addressing the folks that we're talking about. Instead of using that appropriate language, instead of using guilt and shame and finger pointing. And I've even heard people say, putting fault on the people surrounding those. And that just compiles all that negativity. So I appreciate the whole language spiel. Important.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, Kathy, your comment reminds me of a point that I usually make that I haven't made yet. Is that we have to be real clear in ourselves and in our work in this, is that we're grounded in the assumption that suicide is not a single factor cause. There's not one thing that happens to a person usually that moves to this kind of distress or this kind of action. So when we think about all of this, it's kind of both and so that also Kathy brought up to the point of like, it's not one thing, right? And so when we talk about in this one thing factor, those folks that are maybe in relationship to that one thing do take on more of an onus of responsibility for that death. For an example, a lot of times, oh, so and so, their girlfriend or boyfriend or partner broke up with them. That's the thing, right? And that's what we call a preceding event. So the thing that happened typically right before a death, but that's not the full bucket of things that led to that preceding event. And so I'm typically very usually clear about like, nope, it is a factor. It's not the factor. And I sit on, unfortunately, all of our 120 counties of our child fatality reviews. which Vanessa's sister leads, and she does such a phenomenal job about it in Franklin County. But it's tricky when we do fatality reviews because we're looking for that one thing, and it's like, no, we need to look for a combination and all of the things that led to that cup overflowing. So I really appreciate your comment, Kathy, and again, hope that it's a both and all, right? Everyone is needed to prevent suicide. So we're meeting folks where they're at. Other comments, questions, thoughts?
Beck, I didn't know if this was a good time to revisit what you asked me to remind you about earlier when we were talking about recommendations for underserved youth suicide prevention that you said you'd come back to. So if not, we can do that at the end.
I gotta go back to the slide to remind my brain what I was thinking about. I don't know y'all about right now, but it's real foggy up here. It gets real squirrely, and then I'm like, I don't know what happened. Well, I don't know what my thought was. So I've always been like that, but it's definitely not. It's definitely not gotten better. The Dougie Institute or the Dougie Center. That was what I wanted to double check with too. So the Dougie Institute or the Dougie Center, they have the resources related to kind of developmental, and they also have lots of different resources related to just grief, period, and supporting our young. All right, so I'm going to transition us, if folks are good, into kind of what are some of the things we can do. So we have a good layer of kind of all of the factors that, some of the factors, again, we can't say all, that we might. So I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint. We'll go. So here's some recommendations. So going back to enhance, and I don't know, Dee Dee, if you want to kind of just come up, chat, and share with some of the mental health and work that Kentucky 6 is doing related to enhancing mental health care and tailoring specifically to Black youth needs. But love to hear from you. Make sure that folks know that those are coming if they haven't already started registration.
No, we're still working on the flyers. They're in their final stages of approval. We do have our first one coming up, so stay tuned. February 28th, the Nifley, Dr. Stephen Nifley with the University of Cincinnati is providing a racial trauma overview training. It's a 1-hour training. There will be at least 6, if not 7 opportunities to attend that, all Zoom. And a couple will be recorded. So if you miss them, I can get you the recording. Dr. Nifley also is providing several other opportunities. So he has screening and assessment tools for racial trauma. And he's going to be doing, I think, 3 sessions or 3 trainings on those tools, and then some follow-up consultation sessions for those. So stay tuned for those. I think they start next month. And then he's got, there's been developed a youth racial trauma first aid. All the words are jumbling now, but youth racial trauma first aid, and it's for middle schoolers and high schoolers. It actually is available. I'll find the website. It's available free, and anybody can access it now. I will send out more information about that when I get it written up. And the opportunity. And then there's going to be a foster and adoptive training, parent training, navigating mixed race families that Dr. Nifley will be providing. Kathy, I will put the registration link in the chat for you for the 28th. But like I said, there's 6 opportunities for that. And we're developing the flyer like as I speak. The flyer is but the registration is ready. I've got to finalize that flyer. for those. And then there's he also provides racial trauma therapy modality and youth racial trauma therapy modalities. And Kentucky Six is funding those trainings for free for clinicians. It is a self-paced 6-hour curriculum that he developed, and more information will be coming out about that soon. He's also developing a kids NIFLE Youth Discrimination Scale, and we'll be providing more information about that coming soon. So, yes, big email blasts coming out as soon as they're ready. Stay tuned. The end of this month is when they all start. So feel free. I'll put my email in the chat too. Hit me up if you don't see any of these blasts. I can't imagine you not getting it, but just in case, I will put my email in the chat for you.
Thank you, Dee Dee. She's been a champ of just like showing up and saying the things this week. So I appreciate that. All right. Yes. Okay. Going back to sharing. Everybody see the screen okay? Strengthen family and community supports, address service gaps. And this is what I think it's kind of my call or a call to kind of think about is really promoting that positive culture, that promote that positive cultural identity, that positive racial identity. We have to be really careful when we talk about people, groups of people, and suicide because we don't want to inadvertently connect the two, because that does not exhibit all of an identity. And so I'm going to use the example of trans identity and not at all to kind of compare, but you'll hear oftentimes, queer youth, trans youth are 4 times more likely to die by suicide. Well, if we play that tape out, and that's the message, and that's really the only message we have about trans youth, then what ends up happening is when a trans youth comes out, parents may want to be supportive, but all they've ever been told is that now their young person is more likely to die by suicide. And so they become lumped in this, like, now as a parent or as a caregiver of someone who's just come out to me, I'm now more worried about, are they going to die by suicide? And less about thinking about their identity as like a unicorn of like incredible, awesome diversity and all of that. So I just say that when we're talking about it, let's be real clear about, is this something that needs to be shared in this context, and can it be shared and also in more positive kind of strength, pro identity ways. So I just want to say that out loud, and I know that this whole conversation is entitled Black Youth Suicide Prevention, so I recognize that there is some incongruence there, but I want to think about that and encourage others to think about that. This is an infographic that will also be sent out. And I love this one so much. It is what can we do to protect Black youth from suicide? Connect, invest, uplift. So protective factors are those communities, those relationships, that strong sense of racial cultural identity, and then connecting and investing in those creative spaces. So are we putting our money where our mouth is? Are we investing in creative spaces, healing spaces, non-traditional healing spaces? So, and then uplift and really elevate those cultural traditions and beliefs. And so that has been kind of our core belief and core value as we've created the Black Youth Suicide Prevention Initiative. And let me go back to the slide. So we started in 2022, creating a group that's kind of looking specifically at Black youth suicide in Kentucky. And actually, in 2023, a Kentucky team was invited to Baltimore for the very first inaugural Black Youth Suicide Policy Academy, led by SAMHSA and our incredible branch manager, Brandon Johnson. I don't know if folks are still on social media right now, but if you are, look him up. He is a phenomenal leader in this space, and just period. But him and his group put together the very first Policy Academy. We had 7 states, one of which we were one of them, that were invited to start the work of formalizing this for the nation, but also for our state. So 8 of us went, and again, the prominence of the group were folks who were Black and Black professionals, Black youth. We had one KSU student who was remarkable, and just really led in the space and showcased and shined. So this is the work that we started officially in Kentucky, is a Black Youth Suicide Prevention Initiative. It's still going, it's still funded. And we meet monthly, and we have several different projects, which I'm about to talk with you now. So one of the topics was, okay, how can we expand, enhance, potentially make more safe our crisis and 988 services? So this looks at what kind of data are we collecting? Are we, do we have primary data related to race with our crisis services, with our 988 services? And then thinking about ensuring that those folks who pick up the call to answer 988 in Kentucky, who we contractually work with at the state level through our CMHCs, do they have that framework for awareness related to kind of race-based trauma, risk factors related to folks and race. So we have been working on that and trying to enhance and trying to be more transparent. For example, 988 has an active rescue component, meaning that if I call 988 and through that conversation, that call taker determines that I'm at a high level or imminent level of risk, they can take my phone number, which I called from, and through a formal relationship, they can give that to another provider to do what's called an active rescue. In Kentucky at large right now, most of those folks who are doing that active rescue are law enforcement. We as the cabinet, we as Kentucky are working to make that shift to being more mobile mental health providers or peers or community support advocates or associates. But right now, the way it exists is that most folks who have, and this is only, and I don't want to say only, because that minimizes the impact. This is 2% of calls across Kentucky have this active rescue, involuntary active rescue done. But we have to think about what are the effects of potentially calling law enforcement to a person. How could that increase their risk, and what is their relationship to that rescue source? Is that going to be a source in which they see as supportive, or is it not? And so part of our work within the Black Youth Suicide Task Force and Initiative is to ensure that our Kentucky call takers and crisis support folks are trained in this awareness and this framework of, making sure. So that's one effort. So we've done that lots of different ways. We're a part of the 988 training, call taker training. Christy, I'm drawing a blank on the name that they've created. the state is now doing it, and they are offering 4 times a year for all Kentucky 98 call takers to come to the training. And so we are a part of that training and initiatives. And these have not been easy conversations, mind you, but they are important, life-saving conversations that we are dedicated to having and continuing to have. The other part of our task force or initiative is that one of the recommendations you saw all the way through there is adaptive and or mental health services that look like the person needing the service, or identify as the person, similar as the person needing the service. So one of the things we've been working with Kentucky State University on, which is one of our 2 historically Black colleges and universities in Kentucky, is we, excuse me, through this work, have created a intentional partnership with KSU to increase the number of Black, multiracial, biracial mental health providers in the state. And so that internship is paid, and it's paid at a rate that is a bit above our standard, because we also know that our Black interns are doing more emotional labor. So kind of thinking about that space as well. So that is our contract is almost final. And so we will begin those internship program. We'll begin having interns probably within 3 to 4 months. So, and that's a year-long internship. So if you know anybody at KSU or that attends KSU, that is there. And that also is to help us co-create some of these crisis response interns, review education as well. So we want to make sure we're increasing the number of Black behavioral health workforce providers. And then we want to always center the role of lived experience in both suicide and also racial cultural identity. So this work is being driven by the experiences, the voice of Black youth. And so we are offering and would love to continue to offer a photo voice, which anybody on here familiar with photo voice? It is a form of community-based participatory research. And I'm going to get to a slide about that in just a second, so I'll do that. We also have planned focus groups, and these are through our tailored sites and through other coalitions of young Black Kentuckians. And so we also want to make sure that we are continually looking at data. And I just preliminarily found out that in 2024, we saw a decrease in the number of Black, the number of Black Kentuckians who died by suicide in 2024. So we are celebrating that decrease and continually working towards it being 0. So a little bit more about Photo Voice. Photo Voice, again, is participatory, community-based participatory research. And in the sense of it, we don't want to be draining of resources. We want to kind of have, I don't know, my words are failing me on this one. But the whole goal of Photo Voice is to improve community by addressing the problem at their root. So this empowers participants to record their own community needs, their own individual and community needs and strengths, and it also creates a critical discussion related. So the way it works, and if you've never taken part of a Photo Voice, I love it. But you bring a group of folks together, and in this case, it's Black youth. We are actually doing kind of mixed race groups because we want to kind of see kind of similarities and differences. And so we're doing Photo Voice in that you bring a group together. It's a kind of a closed group in the sense of this group journeys together. We're going to have multiple groups across multiple different sectors, but so this group comes together. They're told what the Photo Voice is, and typically the Photo Voice will have 1 or 2 prominent questions as like a research question or as like what we're trying to identify through this project. And in this one, it was what are things that promote your mental wellness, and what are things that like increased distress related to your mental well-being. And we kept them pretty broad. And so those people, in this case, again, our youth, are given a photo, are given a camera. They can also choose to use their phone if they want, because many of them are way more tech savvy on their phones and all of the apps. So they are given this camera and given a period of time, and they're asked to just take photos of things that answer that research question. And those photos are collected, they come back together, they showcase the photos that they took, and then they write a narrative around them. Sometimes they write like a caption or some kind of alt narrative. They choose one or two for themselves as like, this is the thing, this is the photo that I want to best showcase the answer to this question. And then typically they'll also kind of as a group select a handful of and the idea is then to turn around and showcase or to make more public the photos. And so we did one so far in Paducah at our tailored site in Paducah. And I tell you all, I can't show you the photos yet because the group hasn't consented in how they want them showed. But I'll tell you, when I viewed them as someone who's kind of behind the scenes research part of this, I had like goosebumps, chills, like hope from these pictures and things that I would never have thought about. As someone who's 43, not at all youth age, there was a theme of environment and environmental well-being. Like, am I going to have a world to live in? What is my like physical environmental world going to look like? And am I going to have food? Am I going to have water? Are we going to continue to see some of this environmental distress? And so that was a giant theme. So photo voice is one way that we're doing this, and this is with Dr. Watkins. Is a epidemiologist and also a prevention specialist. So she's leading this work. She's leading the photo voice facilitation. And so we're very excited and hope to have these shared in a way that our young people want them to be shared. So that's just a little bit of what we're doing. If you have a group of young people that you would like to come have us do this photo voice process with, we would love to come and present. Just let me know and we'll be happy. We're also going to try to go to all tailored sites, or is there at least 4 or 5 tailored sites we're going to. Four Rivers ones was just the one that kind of came up first. So I'm trying to think if there's other things. Are there other initiatives that folks want to share about related to kind of increasing those protective factors and decreasing risk of suicide? Also want to look at my time. How are we doing? We're doing all right? Okay. I was like, Vanessa, there's no way we're going to do 70, and here we are. I would say that. What are some other things that folks or other initiatives that folks have heard about that you would love the group to know related to promoting Black identity, culture, joy, all of that, and also kind of directly related to suicide prevention? Anybody want to say anything?
Beck, I just had a question about which agencies have you collaborated with that, like the NAACP or any of those initiatives that already are doing some of this same work? What groups have you partnered with, and how is this initiative funded? I'm interested in how is that funded?
Yes, we're all very interested in things, how things are funded these days. So this pot of money that we're using now came through a NASBID. I can never say that right. National Alliance of so it's called a TTI grant. And so the way TTI grants work, they originate as federal funds. But when you are awarded the money, they give you the whole block right at once, and then it becomes part of your state funds. And so they cannot be affected. Thank you, Lee. They cannot be affected at this point. So that's what's funding the internship project, the photo voice project, the listening sessions. You'll also, from this work, very quickly, we're going to do and I'll tell you who the partners are as well, and also invite any of y'all who would like to come be a part of the task force or the initiative. So we'll soon be releasing a data brief, essentially kind of what I outlined in the sense of, hey, we have data, both quantitative and qualitative, that shows our Black youth are in distress and dying by suicide. So that data brief will be used as part of the listening sessions for youth, and also caregivers, other systems of people in the system of care, or entities within the system of care. And then through that, we're also going to do a policy brief. So that policy brief is in the draft form, and always will be in the draft form until we kind of get there. But so those are two other things. So our community partners that we have as a part of this initiative are Louisville Metro's Public Health Center for Health Equity. So Lakeisha Garner, Chelsea Burton are big. We also have our big partners in the group. We also have forgetting where she's from. It's like the Office of Neighborhoods, Office of something. And then we have KDE represented. We have KSU obviously represented. In Franklin County, there's an organization, and I always get this wrong. Maybe today will be different. I don't want to doubt myself, but the Rhonda Joyce Robinson. Yes. So Dr. Smith, who's there, is on and was a part of our initial group that went to Baltimore. So she and her group are representing not only Black youth, but youth who have parents that are incarcerated and are justice involved. Kelly Rupp of KSU has been a huge partner. Kalila Collins with the Muhammad Ali Center and Dove Delegates has been involved. Spalding University has been at the table for sure. And we're trying to get someone from Neighborhood Healers in Lexington. And so those are kind of the folks that have been kind of at the table the most. And at the department, I'm actually one of 3 that are doing, like, heading up this work or kind of coordinating. So Dr. Brittany Allen, who's our executive, is really the lead. She's our executive advisor, and is doing health equity with the commissioner. She's our executive advisor for health equity. Dr. Brittany Allen is that, and also our colleague John Brodus, who's soon to be Dr. John Brodus, April. We're gonna throw him a giant party because he's in the throes of it and pretty stressed right now. So send him your love and support. Him and I and Dr. Allen have been kind of responsible for note taking, meeting organization, those kind of things. So that's who's at the table, and we would love, this is an open invitation. We would love for anybody, all folks that are interested. We'd love, and I continue the meeting invite. We meet we meet on Tuesdays at 2 or 3 once a month, and I don't know what Tuesday of the month is, but